The Secret Life of Walter Mitty by James Thurber. I'd like to give you a little bit of background. It was written in 1939 and originally published in the New Yorker magazine. 10 years later, it was made into a movie starring Danny Kaye. And one of the reasons it has been so popular is because it sort of speaks to every man. Who among us hasn't had our own little fantasy world, hasn't dreamed of being the great hero under perilous circumstances? I fell in love with the piece as a freshman at Modesto High School when my debate coach suggested this as a selection for competitive humorous interpretation. And maybe it's because I'm so much of a Walter Mitty myself, the piece kind of stuck with me. I did it in my freshman and sophomore years, and then in my senior year and again in junior college, and I was pretty successful with it. Well, 10 years went by, and there was a family reunion. And to my surprise, I discovered that I had remembered about 95% of it. And so, you know, a couple of hours to refresh me, and there it was. And another 30 years went by, and be darned if it wasn't still there for another family reunion. And then a couple of years ago, I said to myself, you know, my grandkids have never seen Walter Mitty. So I asked my good friend Mike Shute if he would bring his video over here. And once more, maybe for the last time, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty by James Thurber. We start out with him deep in the middle of one of his daydreams. We're going through. The commander's voice was like thin ice breaking. He wore his full dress uniform with the heavily braided white cap pulled down rakishly over one cold, gray eye. We can't make it, sir. It's flying for a hurricane, if you ask me. I'm not asking you, Lieutenant Berg. Throw on the power lights. Rev her up to 8,500. We're going through. The pounding of the cylinders increased to pocket, 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 pocket. The commander stared at the ice forming on the pilot window. He walked over and twisted a long row of listening dials. Throw on number 8 auxiliary, he shouted. Throw on number 8 auxiliary, repeated Lieutenant Berg. Full strength in number 3 turret. Full strength in number 3 turret. The crew, bending to their tasks in the huge, hurtling, 8-engined Navy hydroplane, looked at each other and grinned. The old man will get us through. The old man ain't afraid of hell. That's so fast! You're driving too fast! What are you driving so fast for? Walter Mitty looked at his wife, seated beside him in the front seat of the car, with shocked astonishment. She seemed strangely unfamiliar, like a distant woman who had yelled at him from the crowd. Mrs. Mitty went on. You were up to 55. You were up to 55. You know I don't like to go any faster than 40, and you were up to 55. You're 10 step again. It's one of your days. I do wish you would let Dr. Renshaw look you over. Walter Mitty drove on in silence toward Waterbury. The roaring of the F-100-202 through the worst storm in 20 years of Navy flying history faded into the remote and intimate airways of his mind. As he approached the building where his wife was going to have her hair done, he stopped and let her out. Before she got out, she said, "Don't forget to get the puppy biscuits, the what's its name, you know, when I'm gone. Why don't you wear your gloves? Have you forgot your gloves?" He reached in a pocket and pulled out a pair of gloves. He put them on. But after she had turned and gone into the building, and he had driven on to a stop sign, he took them off. "Pick it up, Mac," as the light changed, and Walter Mitty hastily put on his gloves, put the car in gear, and drove on. He drove around aimlessly for a while, and then went by the hospital on his way to the parking lot.
"It's the millionaire banker, Wellington McMillan," said
the pretty nurse. "Yes," said Dr. Walter Mitty, removing his gloves slowly. "Who has the case?"
"Oh, Dr. Remington and Dr. Benbow. But they have phoned in two specialists, Dr. Richard Mitford from London and Dr. Remington from New York."
A door opened down a long, cool corridor, and Dr. Renshaw came out. He looked distraught and angry. "We're having the devil's own time with McMillan, the millionaire banker and close personal friend of Roosevelt. Choreopsis of the ductal tract, tertiary. Would you mind taking a look at him?" "Glad to," said Mitty. In the operating room, there were whispered introductions. Dr. Pritchard Mitford, Dr. Mitty. Dr. Remington, Dr. Mitty. "I've read your book on strepthomucosis," said Pritchard Mitford, shaking hands. "A brilliant performance, sir." "You're very kind," said Dr. Mitty. "Didn't know you were in the States, Mitty," grumbled Remington. "Calls to Newcastle, bringing Mitford and me down here for a tertiary." "You are very kind," said Mitty. Suddenly, a huge, complicated machine with glistening rows and dials that was connected to the operating room began to go, pocket, 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 pocket. "The new anesthesia is giving way," shouted an intern, "and there is no one in the East who knows how to fix it." "Quiet, man," said Mitty. He sprang to the machine and twisted a long row of glistening dials. "Give me a fountain pen," he snapped. Someone handed him a fountain pen. He pulled the faulty piston out of the machine and inserted the fountain pen. "That will hold for 10 minutes. Get on with the operation." A nurse hurried over and whispered something to Renshaw, and Mitty saw the man's face turn pale. "Choreopsis has set in. Would you take over, Mitty?" Mitty looked at him, looked at the craven figure of Benbow, who drank, at the grave, uncertain faces of the two great specialists. "If you wish," he said. They put a white gown on him. He drew on a pair of thin white gloves. Nurses handing him shining, "Back it up, Matt! Look out for that Buick!" Walter Mitty jammed on the brakes. "Wrong lane, Matt," said the parking lot attendant, looking closely at Mitty. "Gee, yeah," said Mitty. He began cautiously to back out of the lane marked exit only. "Leave her sit there, I'll put it away." Mitty got out of the car. "Hey, better leave the key." Mitty handed the man the key. With insolent skill, the parking lot attendant vaulted into the car and expertly backed it to where it should be. "They're so damn cocky," thought Mitty as he walked down the street. "They think they know everything." Once he had tried to take his chains off outside New Mitford and had gotten them wound around the axle. He had had to call a tow truck, and one came out with a young, grinning garage man. After that, Mrs. Mitty had always made him take the car to the garage to get the chains taken off. "The next time," he said to himself, "the next time I'll have my right arm in a sling. That way they'll know I couldn't possibly take the chains off myself, and they won't laugh at me."